try to do something physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual every day. Adds value to my life. Is your business doing the profit margins you want? I think that there's power in that word no, but also power in the clarity of having a vision for yourself.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Kingdom Transformation Nation. I've got my friend Cameron Davis on today with imagodeibookkeeping, right? So
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so we started this business to really focus in and transform business finances. So we focus on profit and loss reports, keeping up with balance sheets and things like that, so that businesses can track their health as they go, and they can make decisions based on where things are at.
So there's, just to educate people, and a lot of entrepreneurs, they unfortunately don't have a lot of business management experience, which, you know, you and I can both help people navigate that. But a lot of people, they don't understand a balance sheet, they don't understand a P&L, and they go out and they hire somebody to do their tax returns, and they think they have somebody doing their accounting. And usually when I'm working with somebody and I ask them, I'm like, hey, well, how much do you pay that person? They're like, $200 a year. I'm like, you don't have someone doing your accounting, you have someone doing your tax return. And I'm like, then my next question is how often do you have a conversation about your P&L and your balance sheet? And they're like, well, we don't. I'm like, okay, all right. So maybe let's enlighten people a little bit, educate them a little bit on what you do, why that's important. You mentioned the word healthier business, which I agree. You know, you can look at a P&L and a balance sheet, and most entrepreneurs, unfortunately, don't have a budget on the expense side or revenue goals on that side. So let's talk about that a little bit. Maybe in layman's terms, if you could explain the difference between what somebody does in tax preparation versus having somebody who's an accounting partner. Let's start with that concept.
Yeah, absolutely. So most of the time, you're right. They're saying, I have an accountant.
Can you tell my wife that? I'm just kidding.
You're not right all the time.
Right.
So
No,
we'll caveat that.
Yeah.
But most of the time, that's what they say. I have an accountant. Right. And you're right. They go once a year. They give them a shoebox full of whatever they still have data for.
And they have so much anxiety about it. Oh, no, it's tax return season.
Yeah, or they spend 4 days of maddening, intense work just
Craziness.
to try to recreate what we do on a daily basis or
so
weekly,
you eliminate,
monthly basis. Yeah.
You get time back. We were talking about that before the podcast, how to get time back and having the right people in the right seat, right? But also you eliminate some anxiety and some stress, right? Through having an accounting partner versus just having somebody that does your tax return.
Right, because a lot of times even what you can do on the tax return isn't exactly showing the health of the business.
Right. Because
there are things that you spend money on that aren't going to be deductible, and there are going to be other things that don't show up on your profit and loss that you can deduct.
Right.
And so, filing proper tax returns is a completely different picture, even though you use all of those financial documents. So we typically give a monthly ongoing snapshot of where is your business at on your income, how much are you spending, and how can you better make decisions in real time instead of going back in April, or if you file an extension, God forbid, September for the year prior, and be able to try to make decisions that way. And we find a lot of times, probably half of our clients that have come on board, they didn't have any method of accounting. And so essentially they looked at their bank and said, hey, there's money there. We're doing okay. You know?
And that's not always the case. Just because the money's in there doesn't mean it's yours.
That's exactly right.
That's the reason that like some cash flow forecasting is important, those kind of things. But you mentioned a couple of things I want to walk people through and paint a little bit of a picture. The preparation through the year, they have no real accounting systems in place. And when people think the word systems, they get scared because they think it has to be complicated. But it really doesn't. On the tax perspective, like me personally, I have a simple spreadsheet. So instead of putting all those receipts in a shoebox, they go in a file folder. But as I put them in the file folder, I put them on a spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet automatically calculates or tabulates what category they go to. So that's something that I share with people. And so at the end of the year, I can do my taxes in as much time as it takes to click through the buttons and input the information. It's not super complicated. But again, just a simple system to get people to have that. Do you have a tool that, you can help people with, or some sort of simple tax tracker or something like that, a simple spreadsheet that you guys give out or use for your clients? Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but.
We typically just use profit and loss reports.
Okay, so you're using
and then we gather a picture of what else is going to be included there.
Gotcha.
So we're constantly having conversations about vehicles and depreciation and tracking mileage and what strategy are we going to use, because a lot of clients we don't file the taxes for.
Right.
And that's
Different
okay.
service.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
We file taxes for some clients. We don't file taxes for a lot of others. And we're comfortable there. We're not trying to build a tax focused business. We're trying to build a almost CFO type of business, to where we're helping businesses along the year throughout the year make better decisions and actually understand what goes into their finances.
And I think that's a really good thing, and different from an accounting perspective from a lot of accounting firms, because a lot of accounting firms, you talk to them and they're in tax season, they're like running 100,000 miles an hour, working 800 hours a day, trying to get who knows how many tax returns prepared, right? And a lot of times they aren't focused on the financial health throughout the year, with their clients. And so I think that's probably something I've heard that's a key difference that sets you guys apart from most other people is being involved in that. Another thing too is people think their finances and accounting has to be real complicated. I don't think that's necessarily true, right? It can be if you have enough things going on, but a lot of times people don't do things that they're uncomfortable with, right? It could be sales, could be accounting, could be marketing, could be whatever. And so just kind of encourage people. Let's talk a little bit about like what is a P&L, what is a balance sheet, and let's give them a little bit of information and education on that, because it's not rocket science, it's not complicated, but a lot of people, they just don't have any experience looking at those things or creating them. And that's one of the reasons they should hire you to help them navigate that journey. So let's talk about those a little bit, and then let's talk about y'all's process about like when you bring a client on, what does that look like? Like, they're like, hey, here's our shoebox of information. We don't have a budget. Let's talk about those three subjects. So first off, like walk us through, kind of a P&L, because I think people probably are fairly familiar with that from the concept of having a budget. Right. So let's just chat about that for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. So profit and loss report is going to capture your gross income, the entire amount of money that you took in for that month. And then it's going to subtract all of your cell phone bill, your gas that you bought.
Operating expenses.
Exactly. All your operating expenses, your cost of goods sold, supplies and materials, tools, all of those things are going to go on there. And then at the bottom, you're going to get a net profit of how well your business did during that month. Now, what we try to go into is a little bit deeper process as to what doesn't show up on that profit and loss report, because we have clients sometimes say, well, my profit and loss report said I made 10 grand, but I've got 2 in the bank. How is that even possible?
Right.
And so when you pay things like a car loan, credit card bill, things like that, it does not show up on your profit and loss,
right?
Because it's not typically a taxable expense. And
right.
so,
or like a credit card bill that you might buy gas with it doesn't say, QT gas. It says, CNL credit card or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so, understanding what's on there, what's not, can help them build a budget based on that framework.
Yeah.
But then also on the balance sheet side, we're tracking loans, we're
right.
tracking assets like vehicles, we're
yep.
tracking tools, so that at tax time we can strategize how are you going to depreciate this, or are you going to depreciate
right.
it? What does that mean, and
right.
what are the implications?
How long are you going to keep it?
Yeah, what are the implications of
yeah.
doing that? Because it might not be the best idea,
Yeah.
And so we do the math on what is this going to look like for the next 3 years to depreciate this car versus how many miles are you driving? Are you tracking them?
Right. Are you taking the mileage? Are you taking the depreciation?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're trying to help them build a picture in June of what April is going to look like, so that they can get prepared, because you can't prepare for April in March for the
right.
year prior.
Right.
If you own a landscape company and you want to buy a trailer, well, what's the tax implications of doing that? Should you do that this year? Should you wait till next year? What does all that look like? And how do we paint that picture? And so that's ultimately what we're here for. A lot of firms, they are tax focused, and the temptation for us was to go heavy into tax, but that's the end result. It's not where we're starting.
Yeah.
We want to start at the beginning. We want to build this from the ground up. We don't want to just build something just so we can file taxes. And most of the time, that's what firms are doing.
Right.
They put in a kitchen in the house just so they can get the certificate of occupancy, and yet they don't try to figure out the function of that kitchen and make it so that it can be used for who's living there.
Yeah, no, that's a really great concept because I always talk about like results and then the journey on the way, right? So from a financial perspective, you're doing the same thing. You're helping people create and understand and be educated on the journey on the way. The taxes are the thing that has to happen at the end of the year. That's a very transactional situation. And I find it very, very common with most entrepreneurs. They don't have any simple or basic accounting systems or concepts in place. And that's what happens. They think, well, I did $1 million in business and I didn't make any money. Well, what'd you spend it on? Well, I don't know. I look at my bank account. It's like, well, do you know what your profit margins are? Not really. Well, do you pay yourself? I pay the bills. It's like, you got to unpack all of those things. And again, I think it really boils down to a lot of people. They have a skill set and they just haven't surrounded themselves with the right people to help them navigate all the parts and pieces of the business operation side that they need to. So that's really great information that you do that. And I would encourage people that are listening to this that are entrepreneurs to reach out. Where can they hit you up at?
I would say the best place or the most common place would be the Facebook page.
Okay.
That's typically where we get.
And what is that called?
Imagodeibookkeeping.
And that's with an I.
And consulting.
Right? Yeah. With an I.
Yeah.
Okay. So
IMAGODEI.
There you go.
Bookkeeping and consulting.
Because a lot of people may be like, AMOG? E? What?
Yeah. Well, and it also gives us an opportunity like that. Unique of a name, that's when we established like our homeschool, registration with the state, that's what we called it.
Yeah.
And so we kind of mirrored that when we started this business because, and really it puts Jesus first.
Yeah.
And it gives us an opportunity to kind of tell what we believe and why we believe and why we're even doing this,
Yeah.
And so Imago Dei means in Latin, image of God.
Okay.
And it's from Genesis 1:27, where God said, "Let us make man in our image."
Nice.
And so we believe, obviously, that gives thought process, and maybe God has hair. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe,
well, in some way, God has given us all talents. He's planted a piece of that in us and given us all a job to do to make a difference for the kingdom while we're here on this planet.
Yes, so it's more than just physical attributes. It's you have a purpose,
right? And
God gave you giftings to accomplish that purpose.
Absolutely.
And I can't build houses.
Right. Yeah.
But man, we can put together some accounting.
Balance sheet,
and so the guy who's gifted to build a house, man, he deserves the best accounting he can get because he's not gifted in that area. Maybe not, maybe he is. But for the guy who, is trying to do the best he can to take the skills he's got and to establish a business, build something for his family, build a legacy for the next generation. Yeah. We want that guy so bad to succeed. He deserves it. And
in order to succeed for a long time, you have to adopt some sort of financial advice and principles, right? And you've got to take the time to implement those things before you get too big. Otherwise, it'll eat you alive. Whether that's a simple spreadsheet or an accounting firm or, whatever it may be, you should start with something. We were talking earlier about like YouTube University. Like if you can't afford to hire somebody, make a phone call, ask for help, YouTube it, Google it. I mean, that's not necessarily the best place to go, but it's better than just going with the wind. And I know a lot of people, especially in the beginning of their business journey, they go with the wind. Right. And they're lost and confused about taxes and all that kind of stuff. And they have so much anxiety about it. It's really funny. At the end of the year, like my taxes are organized. I'm not worried about it. I'm not super anxious. But a lot of people around tax, I'm like, oh man, I gotta get, like you said, shoe boxes and receipts. I got to clean up my truck and I did this and I did that. And I don't know. And I'm like, because we went through that initially. And so finally I got frustrated enough. I'm like, what if we just kept up with it all year? Like if we just
amazing. Yeah.
If like when I had a receipt, I put it in my wallet, and then I get home, I pull it out of my wallet, I put it in a folder, and instead of just putting it in a folder, if I just type it in a spreadsheet, put it in the category all the time or once a week, then at the end of the year, it's not complicated.
And even QuickBooks and different software like that have those options.
Sure.
We use Keeper, which is a software that helps with managing the practice, but also has receipt management. QuickBooks, I mean, by the time you sit down in your truck and start it from the gas station, you can snap a receipt from the QuickBooks app to capture that receipt right there and then match it to the transaction.
So what we ended up doing probably 2 years ago, might have been a year ago, we ended up getting QuickBooks and starting that journey, and we auto-categorize like receipts and that kind of stuff. So like I can look at my phone and I can tell you how much money we spend eating out. I can tell you how much money we spend on gas. I can tell you how much money we spend on groceries. And so there are other tools, and that's not super expensive. I mean, there is some expense to that, but then again, now it saves me having to follow through, and I can just look at things. And it gives you a certain level of comfort.
Yeah, typically less than $50 a month will.
Yeah, I think it's like 69 maybe or something like that, but it's not anything crazy, but well worth it.
Absolutely.
For just the simplicity sake of it. So let's talk a little bit. We talked about a P&L. Let's talk a little bit about a balance sheet. A lot of people, when I ask them, hey, are you getting your financials? Are you looking at your financials with your accounting person? They're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, well, what do you get? They're like, well, we get a P&L. What about the balance sheet side of things? Because that paints a totally different picture, and they're not one and the same. So give us a brief kind of, in layman terms again, like we did on the P&L. Let's talk about what a balance sheet is.
Yeah. You're basically keeping track of your bank balances, assets, and liabilities.
Okay.
So your tools, equipment, vehicles, and all the loans that you owe money for.
Well, and the reason a lot of that's important, and I would encourage people this too, the reason it's important to have good accounting procedures is because if one day you want to sell your business, right? And I hear this from time to time when people are like, hey, I want to sell my business. I'm like, all right, let's look at the financials. Like, what's your net operating income? $1 million. Is that gross or net? They're like, well, we brought in $1 million. I'm like, okay, that's gross, And then do you have a balance sheet? Like, what are your assets? What's paid for? What are the liabilities? Because just because you have a truck doesn't mean it's an asset if you have a $60,000 note on it. Exactly. And so you get to paint that picture through the balance sheet and the P&L together to help come up with a business valuation. And it's unfortunate when people get to the end of the road, and I've seen this in some older folks that are kind of retiring, when they get to the end of the road and they don't really have years and years and years tracking an OI. And so the business valuation is hard to come up with, and then they don't have assets. They have a job, and so it turns out not to be worth enough money to retire on. Yeah. So, a piece of this, if I could encourage people, is, again, to reach out to you to start that process sooner than later, because you don't want to build this whole thing for years and years and years of your life and then wind up on the back end with it not being worth anything because you can't track it and you can't report it. And unfortunately, when you're selling something to an investor or an investment company, they're going to do their homework and their due diligence, and they're going to want that information, and they're going to look at that math before they offer you $5 million for your business because it matters. They've got to be smart with their money. That's how they got there.
Yeah, I always think about that process as like if I were standing in front of the guys on Shark Tank.
Right.
What am I going to tell them?
What's the value?
Yeah, what am I going to tell them, and what are they going to tell me?
Yeah.
If they knew everything, what are they going to say?
I love that show.
Oh, love it. Yeah.
I love that. And have you ever seen The Prophet with Marcus Lemonis?
Love The Prophet. Yeah.
Oh, man, that's a good one, too. So I think about that.
Almost more.
Yeah, The Prophet's
good.
Because
it's like really, like, it's not just presenting a business to invest in. It's actually diving into him thing. And Mike Andes as well. Do you know who that?
I don't think so.
Guest of Lawn Care. He does a lot of YouTube content on going in and helping a business turn things around.
Okay, I haven't seen that.
Either they're like just hemorrhaging money, or all of their staff left and they just really need to turn things around.
That's cool.
He does 45 minutes or an hour long process of talking through what to do, how to do it, those kind of things.
That's cool. What was his name again?
Cool. Mike Andes.
Mike Andes. All right, check that out. But it is so true. Like when you get an opportunity to be around some people smarter than you, which I encourage people to be around all the time. If you're the smartest guy, strongest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. And that's a humility, pride thing we can talk about later. But if you were standing there in front of people who are billionaires, who have done business, and you're going to stand there as a small fish in the Shark Tank and be like, hey, here's my thing, what would they say? And so it's really funny that you mentioned that, because I think about that every time I get to be part of a business. Like one day we're going to go sell this thing, and we're going to go home, we're going to retire, we're going to call it a day. What's it like? What do we have? What like patents and processes? What do we have that's intellectual property that's in place that makes this value, or a system or something? Or what's the sales? And then also, what's the profit margin?
Right.
I ask that to a lot of people that I coach. It's part of our mentoring program. And a lot of times, unfortunately, they don't have anything in place to track that.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of entrepreneurs spend their whole lives building themselves a job instead of a business. And that's one of the things that I love to help people escape is, they build themselves a busy job, right? Where they're not tracking any of that kind of stuff. And that's stepping from that. And it's a season, right? We all go through it where we're like, man, I got the skill set. I'm going to go do this thing, and we're going to wing it. Well, then some point you've got to turn it into more of a professional operation where you're starting to build yourself a business and you're not working 800,000 hours a week and you are assigning tasks to people and you're not trying to pull your tax returns out of a shoebox and all that kind of stuff. And, but that's a huge thing to think about, at some point, is to have some pretty serious reflection in your business. What's it worth? What's it going to be worth? Are you really building something?
Yeah, and those two levels are awesome because there's accountability to the government, obviously.
Right.
Render it unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and then there's an accountability factor to what's going to happen to this ship. Eventually, you're going to hand this ship off, or you're just going to sink it.
Right.
And
it's
whatever.
just you just close up shop and go home.
Yeah, and being accountable to that is one thing, but on a much bigger scale, being accountable to the Lord, and sometimes it costs more money to run things the way that you should run them from a kingdom perspective, because you give more away or you're more honest about what you're doing, and sometimes that means paying a little bit more taxes if you're going to truly stand and say, like, I'm faithful in this, I'm not fudging the numbers or whatever.
Well, and it's all about being a good steward, right?
Exactly.
And I like to think about it like from a gardening perspective. It's funny because I wrote about that this morning in my quiet time notes, like apples and seeds and that kind of stuff. But in talking about talents too that God's given us, being a good steward of those things, and that's why it's called Kingdom High Performance Coaching. Because in my own personal life, I want to be a good steward of the talents and time that God has given me on this planet to make an impact for the kingdom.
Right.
And if we look at it from that perspective, that's a pretty high bar to set, I think. And a lot of times we just don't know where we've got to go to get the bar to set there. And that's the reason it's really important to have contacts or to be able to ask for help. And so, from a financial perspective, hats off to you for helping people navigate that journey instead of just being like, I want to take people's money at tax time and do as many as I can. Like, you want to do a really good job. And I think that not only sets you apart, but will set you apart. Plus, the fact of the faith-based bar is a big thing. Really funny subject on that. A lot of people, they're like, man, you shouldn't talk about faith and business. I'm like, well, I disagree. Because as a faith-based business person, I'm called to do good things. I hold myself to a pretty high moral, ethical performance standard. And I'm like, when you want to do business with somebody that holds themselves to that level of accountability,
right?
And they're always
yeah.
I'm like, okay.
These aren't just decisions we make. This is the lifestyle we live.
Yeah.
And if you don't, fine, but you're gonna have to answer for that.
Sure.
And
that's okay too. If that's the road you want to hoe.
I'd much rather my kids see me live that lifestyle and make decisions that aren't going to always benefit me, but they're going to be faithful to the Lord.
Right.
And
and here's the funny thing about that. Usually when you make decisions that are based on a faith foundation and being a good steward of what God's called you to be a good steward of, usually those decisions are beneficial for us.
Right.
In the long run.
Yeah, and really, I mean, and maybe I'm pushing further down the episode here, but coming from where we've come from when we started this thing to now, we've blasted through several goals that we had, and every goal that we accomplish, it's almost like that goal isn't good enough once you get there,
right?
And I've had to really take a step back, and we're bigger than we've ever been right now, and we have more clients than we've ever had, and things are going awesome, and we're taking on more clients, because we're growing a culture in this thing, that's going to really hopefully revolutionize a little bit about the way people think about this stuff.
Yeah.
Because I come into this as an outsider.
Yeah.
I'm not a CPA. But you don't have to be. You don't have to be a CPA.
It's a math problem.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And so if what we're doing isn't rooted in more than just the next goal and the bottom line and the top line and client number
all
and
things.
Whatever, comparing ourselves to somebody else, if it's not rooted in something bigger than that, then I'll just close this thing up.
It's easy to quit.
I'll just go. Yeah, I'll close this thing up. You know, because what am I even doing? You know, why do we do this?
Yeah,
and I'll never be happy, and I'll never be satisfied. And my kids will see that, and they'll grow up the same way, and they'll do the same thing. And we're just we're duplicating what we are through our kids and into future generations.
I think that everybody in life has an opportunity to get off the roller coaster of life per se. The typical rhythm or idea of life that we're sold. You got to go get the job. You got to go make more money. You need more square footage. You need more stuff. You need more things. You need a bigger couch. You need a bigger TV. You need more, just that society of more. But that's not really what life is about.
Right.
When we become better, I always say it's not about more. It's about better, better, better. Right. And when you look at that from a faith-based concept, when you become better as the man and husband and father and entrepreneur that God made you to be, and you are a more effective steward of the talents that God has given you, well, how much bigger impact do you think you can make for the kingdom?
That's right.
Right? Even in the Bible, I think it's King Solomon, he talks about using worldly wealth for the kingdom. Right? There's nothing wrong with going and generating revenue and doing a good job and building a business and making a difference, not just for your friends and your family, but everybody. But if you do, you can also make a bigger impact.
Right.
And I forget who told me this one time. They said, if you call up a soup kitchen and you're like, hey, I can volunteer Saturday, I can write a check for $100,000. What do you think they're going to say?
They're going to want the $100,000.
They're going to want the $100,000. They're going to be like, stay home, enjoy the coffee, like hang out with the family. They're going to want that. So if you have the capacity in the talents that God has laid on your heart, mind, and soul to be an entrepreneur, and the talents to generate revenue, and you have the ability to do that, and you surround yourself with the right people to challenge you as a man and a husband and a father and entrepreneur to do those things, then imagine being able to do that. Right?
Yeah.
Now, if you're called to serve, if you have the talents with that, go serve. Do the thing. Do that as well. I had a meeting earlier this week with a guy, just a great man of wisdom and knowledge and life and really cool stuff. Hope you're enjoying the podcast. We want to give a shout out to our sponsor, The Acquisition CEO. If you're curious about buying or selling a business, hit him up at the link below, theacquisitionceo.com. Also give him a follow on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And now back to the podcast. Thanks. We were talking about giving goals, right? And he was talking about a guy came to him and he wanted to give away $1 million a month.
Wow.
Right? And you're like,
who was he? What was his name?
Yeah, well, yeah. I got another meeting with him after this. That's where I'm going. But so you think to yourself, I'm sitting there having coffee, and I'm trying not to. I'm like, well, where am I at? But God always sends the people. I got 1,000 things we could talk about, but my point of that is he's hanging around with people that want to give, right? And the guy's like, God's laid this on my heart, mind, and soul, made me the man to do the job. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to give away $1 million a month. And me and my wife have a goal. We want to give away $100,000 a month. That's our giving goal. And I'm like, I thought that was pretty cool, until you're like, wow. But my whole point of that is when God's given you the talents to go do those things. Now I'll tell you this, on the back end, that guy gives away $1 million a month. Yeah. Now, he didn't in the beginning, but that was something that God laid on his heart, and he had enough faith to go take the walk, to do the things that God told him to go do, to go, all right, and now he does. How cool is that? The impact of that. Yeah. So anyway, neat story talking about just being the men and husbands that God made us to be and having enough faith to go do that stuff, but also having a foundation of, this isn't about me. Right. Like, how much revenue does it take to be able to have that type of net income to be able to give away for a business? It's a big number.
That's a whole lot. Yeah.
And you were talking about, it being about more than just the things. And I was talking about being more than just a bigger couch or a bigger TV or more than stuff. It's pretty wild, you know, with the journey that God can take you on. And so that's what I love to think about, it encourages a fool out of me. The journey that God can take you on.
Yeah. And I love Dr. John Deloney and all the Ramsey guys, because he's the Ramsey personality guy, where he says, if you think that something's going to make you happy, and then when you get there, you're still with you. Yeah. You're the same person on the other side of that you were before. Yeah. And if you don't change some of those mindsets, you're never going to get there. You'll never arrive. And on one hand, we should never arrive. We should always strive for more and better and whatever. But at the same time, we should arrive within ourselves that we are content. We are happy. Sure. We have joy, not happy. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that cuss word. Right. Yeah. So, we should. I agree with you on the joy versus happy thing. Happiness is temporary and joy is kind of internal. But a lot of us, we seek external happiness in the place of that internal joy. That's right. And we're not fulfilled. And so we all spend so much time chasing this thing or this stuff that we think will make us happy. If I could just do this, if I could just join that, if people would just see me as that, I'd be happy. And then sometimes you get there and you're
you're not joyful because you're trying to fill that hole of joy and fulfillment with some things and stuff that you think will make you happy.
Right.
And that's the power of personal growth, and also like the calling of God on our lives. Because once you learn that that's not what is supposed to make you happy. We have a soul. We have a mind, a body, and a soul. And the problem is we're trying to water the garden of our soul with happiness and stuff instead of, developing that joy from fulfillment that God has really made us to understand, right?
Right.
And that comes from having a foundation in faith. Great topic. Love that stuff. So let's talk a little bit about you and your growth. We were talking about growth and joy and fulfillment and happiness and those kind of things from a business perspective, and it's not about more. But when you started your business, a lot of people, they struggle with, am I going to go do the thing, right? You're like, you feel this pull, this calling, this talent, whatever these things are, this idea that God has planted inside of you, and you're like, I got a job, I got like people to feed and like bills to pay, and you want me to leave this job thing and go be an entrepreneur, and you want me to start an accounting firm? That doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, right.
You're like, I could be a painter maybe or something. I don't know what, in those moments what you're thinking about. But you did. You had a job, and then, you started the conversation with people, and you started the business, and you had enough faith to step out and go do those things. But now you're working for yourself full time. Let's talk about that journey and kind of the thought process from then, because I remember we had a Zoom call at some point, and you were in a truck,
of times.
I think, right?
Maybe
you were on a job or something, wherever you were, whatever you were doing.
Yeah.
You weren't doing this full time.
Yeah.
You weren't
Very
doing this full time.
I was in a vehicle somewhere.
And we had talked about that, about going and doing the things that God lays on your heart, and it's really cool to see how those things shake out. I love seeing people's journey, because the joy that you get to experience when you go do what God made you do. Quick thought on that is, like, a lot of times God gives us like a job to do, and he gives us a shovel, right? He's like, hey, you got to go do the thing. But instead, he gives us two choices. You could have a shovel or an excavator. Like, we choose the shovel, right? And he's like, I gave you an excavator. Like, you should probably use that talent. We're trying to fight life with this shovel. And he's like, if you would just have enough faith to go do the thing I called you to do,
right,
you'd be working with an excavator.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, okay. But anyway, that's a whole other subject. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
The journey from job to entrepreneur.
So we come from similar backgrounds a little bit, even though I was in the insurance industry.
Yeah.
And so I had an insurance agency. I was really trying to grind and trying to make it work. It didn't.
Right.
It failed miserably.
You were using that shovel.
Oh man, yeah. I wish it was a shovel.
It was like a spoon.
So we made almost nothing, in that first year, and
Sure.
I took other jobs and just different stuff. And so finally we got to a point of like, we've got to hang this up, and like we've got to go to the next thing. Yeah,
right. Whatever that
next
is.
What's next on our journey? Because we can't do this anymore. It's just not there. The lessons that we learned by like essentially starting over during that season were invaluable. I mean, I would never want to learn them again, but I never want to forget what I did learn.
Yeah.
And so I got a good job. Clocking in, clocking out, doing everything I can for the company, as they're growing super fast. I think when I started there, they had like 40 employees, and when I left, it was like 240.
Wow.
And so they grew, exponentially over the few years that I was there. But even during that time, like I couldn't scratch the itch of building something and growing something. And, it took a couple of years of that. Stability was great, but then, we had chickens, and I'm like, how many chickens would we have to sell the eggs? And like, is this even profitable?
You're doing the math.
Can we sell chicks? Like, watching YouTube,
I need
like
3,000 chickens. I got
exactly
quarter acre.
Oh man, and renting out our camper. Like,
Right.
can we do? Is that sustainable? We made like double the payment we had that year. And everything. But like, I couldn't just stay
How many
still.
campers can I buy?
How many
Put
campers would it
chickens in
take?
the campers. No.
Most definitely, yeah. So, so we're doing that. We're just going along this journey. I can't stay still. I can't. My wife is so wise, and she helps me so much. And I always say we, like it's just me right now. But I say we because one, we're going to be adding people, and Mike, she is so instrumental in what I do now.
Yeah, just who you are.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And so she kept me grounded in so many ways during that season that I was just trying to scratch something I couldn't hit, whatever. And so, I wanted to help businesses, and that's what I wanted to do with the insurance industry. And, got a call from a buddy of mine from high school. Grew up with this guy, an awesome guy, still a client. But he said, hey, I'm working for this guy doing construction. I'm working for this guy doing work for him. I got to get my workers' comp figured out because, it's just a wreck. His books are a wreck. He didn't, he didn't have a clue what's going on. And I'm like,
not tracking his payroll.
Yeah, I didn't have an insurance license anymore, but I gave him the best advice I could, knowing what I knew. And I said, hey, do you think he'd let me take a look at his books and just see
what that number is?
See if I can help him, see if I can make any sense of what he's doing, because I understood the concepts of everything. Yeah. And so he said, I don't know if he would, but I would. I need your help. Yeah. And I'm like, really? Okay,
like,
let's do it.
He said, yeah. Babe, he said yes.
I accidentally started a business,
Yeah.
And so, 7 months of once a week on Sunday nights, going through his receipts and all this stuff, put him in a spreadsheet, couldn't even spell QuickBooks at that time, this is 2022, and so finally after a couple of months got him QuickBooks, during that journey. But, I got the same itch that I did before, which was about January saying, well, I got one client,
how many chickens can I get?
Are there other businesses that need this? Like, is this really like something that we could do? And so just started making some calls. I've never been afraid of cold calling, know? And so.
But you can't be afraid of people. Like I always laugh. I mean, whether you're in insurance or whatever it is, like nobody's going to get you. Like they're not going to come down to your office and eat you. It's just not going to happen.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, there's a way to do it and there's a way to not do it.
Sure.
So it's one of those things, some people are going to hate it no matter what you do.
Right.
And other people are going to be like, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. I've got it, and you're like, all right, I won't call you back.
But here's the thing. You made an important point. You weren't trying to sell anybody something. You were trying to help them solve a problem.
Exactly.
Like that first guy, you weren't like, hey man, we got the best accounting. I'm the best accountant. We got accounting. I'm an accountant. I'm the best. I'm a best accountant. Like that was not the thing. It was like, hey, can I help you?
Exactly.
Can I help you solve a problem?
Exactly.
And most people, when you approach problems like that, whether it's cutting somebody's grass, whether it's selling T-shirts or hats or insurance or real estate or coach, whatever it is, if you simply ask people, hey, here's what I really enjoy, and God's given me a gift of it, I'd like to help you solve a problem. Could we at least just have a conversation? And most people will be like, yeah, I'd love to have a conversation. You're not selling them anything. But also, too, like I want to encourage people not to give up, because you also made another really important point. Like you had this idea in your head and heart with chickens. Didn't work out. No problem. Camper. That worked out a little bit, right? You're like, oh, okay, well, I'm doing some math here. I'm starting to look at some things. But you didn't quit. You also didn't go start a chicken farm because, you had some common sense about yourself. You're like, well, that just doesn't make math sense.
Yeah, I didn't go get a loan so that I could dump, $50,000 into, infrastructure to like make this thing happen that might not happen.
Right. Yeah, you were using some education and some common sense about it. Right. But then when the opportunity came up and it started to click. But I love to encourage people because you had to go through those moments of practice, right? You got to practice some things that won't work out in order to do what really will work out. And without those moments of practice, and sometimes that's 6 months, sometimes it's 6 years. The sooner we learn our lessons God's trying to teach us, the sooner that practice part kind of ends in our lives. So there's some encouragement there. But like you didn't quit. And a lot of people, I just want to remind them, don't quit. Whatever you're trying to figure out, whether you're starting with crayons or cookies or coffee or whatever it may be, T-shirts, bracelets, whatever it may be that you're starting out with, continue to think through the process of entrepreneurship and doing the math. And also the main question isn't about how much you can sell, it's about who can you help.
Right.
And I think that's a shift between like the salesy people that really struggle versus the people who are authentic and they really want to make a difference. It's like, hey, how can I help you? How can we work together?
Exactly. And that really contributed to the types of clients we looked for.
Sure.
We looked for the guy who had been in business for less than 5 years. Everybody else I'd heard teach about this said do the opposite. You need somebody that's $1 million gross revenue and in business for 5 years. And I'm like, that's not my guy right now.
Who I want to help.
I'm working full time. I'm trying to, figure this thing out on the side. And, we start growing by 2 clients a month, as we're kind of trucking along. And at that point, had no idea we were going to make it into a business, and so we're just trying to say, okay, what is this going to be? I wanted to be a pastor, so bad, my whole, for 10 or 15, well, not 15 years now, 10 years, I wanted to be a pastor so bad. And it was almost like God was not taking me that way. And so, during that whole process, one prayer I said was, if you won't take me there, That's fine. I want to be in your will.
Yeah.
But would you let me do something in the marketplace?
Yeah.
Would you let me minister in the marketplace, to shine your light somehow,
Sure.
And this was like way early on. And so looking back, it's just this process of faithfulness to him, but also just faithfulness to the process of, I always said I was trying to grow as slow as we could, because if I had if working full time, I had 10 people call me wanting me to do their books, that would be a problem.
Sure.
And I wouldn't be able to do it. And
Right.
so, we wanted to be strategic, and it really allowed us to grow in a way that we made good decisions. And so we weren't trying to just chase the next dollar. We were trying to say, how do we do this the smartest way that we can, so that it's as the least amount of complication. We didn't get 15 different systems set up and then hit the ground running. We said, okay, what do we need now? And then the next stage, okay, what are we going to need? Okay,
Right.
At some point we're going to need this. At some point we're going to need that. And so we've been really slow to implement. Yeah, strategic about what we take on like externally, and then really quick to change internally.
Sure.
In order to really adapt to where we're at right now as a business. And so
I think it's I think Jeff Bezos is the guy that said it. Be clear on the destination, flexible on the journey.
exactly.
But one of the things too you made a really important part of is like it wasn't just about the money. Now,
Yeah.
it's revenue generation is critical to
Yeah.
a business. However, money is not what people should focus on. Money's a result.
Right.
It's the journey that gets the result, and most people miss that kind of matrix of tasks and thought process and focus in their business and life. It's like if you want a six-pack, you don't just think about that, right? You think, okay, well, I don't need to eat this candy bar. Okay, well, I don't need to eat all these donuts. I don't need to go to McDonald's. All right, I need to be in a calorie deficit. Like, you've got to
Right.
think about the journey.
Exactly. Every day.
Revenue is the end result, but you've got to think about the journey in between. How are you going to get there? And so, I just love to remind people of that thought process, that it's not about the money. If you put a dollar sign on your vision board, that's probably not really a wonderful thing to think about, because you can't just think about that and get there. You got to think about how many conversations do you need to have? How many people do you need to help? And if you go back to the concept, if you make it bigger than you,
Yeah.
right, then that destination of the money, that's again a result, and it'll come. And that's evident in your life and your journey and your commitment to that process and just being faithful in it. Like when it's bigger than you and you have a purpose, right? God's given you a passion, and you have a purpose, and you put those two things together, and then you have enough faith to take the walk.
Yeah.
Like God will work the rest out, right?
Yep. Yeah. And if that dollar sign is your peak, then you'll stop hiking as soon
Right.
as you get there.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
where are you
gonna go?
Where are you going to go now?
Yeah.
You got there.
Yeah.
Now what?
Yeah.
You just have to go back down.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Something good to think about. And it also reminds me, like a lot of people, they arrive at that destination, like you just mentioned, and then they quit.
yeah.
And John Maxwell said this one time, that's the difference between good and great.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people arrive in the parking lot of good, right? They have that goal, and they got there, and that's where it kind of dies. Like they may stay there for 40 years, but that's where it dies. When you step out of that parking lot of good and you're headed towards greatness, there's no more parking lot.
Right.
Right? It's the journey.
Right.
Right? And being who God made you to be, there's no more parking lot. And like, everybody in the parking lot, I was like, where are you going? Like, you're doing good. Like, no, I've got to continue to go be great. Right?
Yeah.
I want to pursue the process and the journey of greatness, both in my faith, my finances, physically, my family, and all of those things. That's why I always like to talk about mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, and financial. It's not about arriving at a certain level.
Right.
It's about what are you doing at the level you're at to continue to grow towards the level you're not at.
Right.
And how are you surrounding yourself with people that are challenging you, and you're challenging each other to continue to grow and develop in those things? Because you don't want to. I don't want to be around people to where when I get to a certain point, they're like, hey man, you've arrived, you're good, just call it a day. That's a dangerous place to be and dangerous people to hang around.
Yeah.
I want to be around people like, hey, okay, you want to give away $100,000 a month? Well, can you give away $1 million? And you're like, wow, thanks for the challenge, like, but those are the kind of people that they continue to help you grow in life.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's almost like, in your spiritual walk, sanctification.
Yeah.
That you should never arrive.
Yeah.
And really, like, the more sanctified you become over time, and the closer we get to the Lord, or whatever phrase you want to use there, you know, the more things we're going to recognize that need adjustment.
Right. The less you feel like you've arrived.
Yeah. The more you align the car, the more you notice is out of alignment.
Yeah.
You know, and
hey,
so
it's like a performance driver, like,
Right.
kind of like what you're saying.
Exactly.
If you become a Formula One driver, you're going to be like, hey, the bolt's out of whack. And
Yeah.
like before, you know, your life is so sloppy, you'd be like, I don't know, didn't even know it happened. I had tread on the tires.
Yeah, just go to Costco with this thing.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, let's go. It's funny. My pastor talks about that sometimes, about like the Christian who thinks they've arrived. They're usually the biggest pain in the room, right?
Yeah.
They're like slapping everything. They think they know everything. They've got all the answers. And I can't remember he's got like a tagline for it that he says, but it's true. When you are on the pursuit of sanctification, I think about like Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego in the fire, right?
Yeah.
And it is a purification process. Or even like Paul, right? The journey that he went on in the Bible, going through like persecuting Christians to writing most of the New Testament. It's like, could you imagine the process and the walk that took? And that's why I love thinking about like faith-based concepts and the wisdom that's in the Bible and applying that to life and business and marriage and all the other things physically. It's a journey. Right? It's not about arriving. And even that concept of leaving the parking lot of good and stepping into the journey of greatness, that's really a faith-based concept where you never arrive. The destination is the end. That's it. That's the only destination. And in business a lot of times, or in life, whether that's physical or financial or even spiritual, when we think we've arrived, it's really good to have people around to remind you that you haven't.
Yeah.
And that's why I like thinking about that concept about people. It's not that they challenge you to make more money or buy a Ferrari or any of that kind of stuff. I think that's useless. But if you surround yourself with other business leaders or entrepreneurs or community leaders who are encouraging you to continue to grow in who God made you to be, that's a healthy thing, I think.
Right.
You know, and a giving goal is a great way to encourage you to grow in your faith. Right. So how much faith you got? You know, I always think about that. When you start operating out of fear, man, I don't know. How much faith you got? Okay, well, God made us to live this way. Let's go be the men and husbands God made us to be.
Yep.
You know? So all right, well, I always like to ask at the end of the episode if there was one piece of advice that you could give somebody, right? They're sitting there, they've listened to this whole thing, and they're calling you to do their accounting work now. I'm just kidding. They got peace about it. They're like, man, accounting and Jesus, that's what we need today. There should be a T-shirt or some sort of slogan of that, bumper sticker. What piece of advice, it doesn't have to be accounting advice. It could be a husband advice. It could be entrepreneur advice. It could be faith advice, whatever it may be. If there's one thing that really sticks out to you in life when you're going throughout day to day, what is it that you would say to somebody to say, hey, man, if I got 5 seconds or 30 seconds to chat with you and we had coffee, this is what I would leave you with? What would that be for you?
Yeah, so probably on on the business side and the accounting side, it's never too late to start.
Okay, it's good.
You know, it's never too late to start. You know, everybody started from somewhere. You know, whether you're in the gym, you know, the biggest guy in the gym wasn't always the biggest guy.
That's right.
And it's never too late to course correct. You know, whether that's in your business, whether that's in your personal life. You know, we are all course correcting all the time. Yeah. And the people who are truly on this journey will respect you for it. The people that are not on this journey will look at you and
they'll be the ones ridiculing you.
They'll be the ones ridiculing you.
Why are you making so many Facebook posts?
Yeah, it's about
you think
time.
You can get your life together now?
Yeah, it's about time you made that change.
Yeah.
You know, you think, it's too late now, whatever.
Or that's what they say.
But the guys that are truly in this for that same reason, that are constantly trying to get better and trying to do better, oh my gosh, celebrating. Yeah. So I think the facade of, everybody's going to think something.
People are going to get you.
Yeah, somebody's going to get me. Like, no, the people who are really in your corner and really doing this with you are going to applaud you.
Yeah, they're going to be clapping for you.
Absolutely.
I think that's so true, so relevant, and a lot of people struggle with that fear mindset of like, oh no, what will people think? Very few people, like you just said, are going to be out to get you. They won't really have anything negative to say. And if they do, go prove them wrong anyway, right? Lean into your faith, have massive faith, don't have that mindset of fear, and then go rock and roll, because what you'll find is most people are clapping for you, and they want to help you get there. So that's good. Cool.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you too, man. Thanks for being on. Appreciate you making it out today in the rain. It's good to see you. It's good to catch up. I'm proud of you, man.
Yeah,
it's good stuff.
I appreciate it.
Really good stuff.